What's up people, LWD Adnan here, welcome to the channel. Something a little bit different, as you can probably tell. This isn't the usual gaming slash streaming slash whatever. I'm starting a new channel that's going to be focused primarily and pretty much only on PC hardware. So PC components, unboxing, reviews, testing, the whole lot. So if that's something that you're possibly interested in, feel free to check it out. I've got the link to the channel in the description. I'd appreciate all and every and any sort of support, and enjoy the video. This channel won't change, don't worry. This is only a bit of a shameless plug slash advertisement, so forgive me, but I've got to do what I've got to do. Enjoy the video and peace. Today we're going to be building my new PC. It's going to be a mid-range PC in this economy where right now we're in 2021, still recovering. Well, I wouldn't even say we're recovering right now, but we're still in the graphics card shortage, somewhat processor shortage, general material shortage, and so PC specs are incredibly difficult to get a hold of right now. So initially I was aiming for a high-range PC, but I've managed to settle with a mid-range a mid-range PC, and this is what we've got. So, to begin with, our star of the show, somewhat, we'll get into the graphics card in a second. We have an AMD Ryzen 5 3600X. Now, initially, I was going to settle for a 3600 because the X is only marginally better than its predecessor, but I somehow got very lucky on eBay. I decided to hop onto eBay and see if there was anything around, and the 3600X came up, so I think I got quite lucky with that one. That is going to be put on an MSI Edge X570 board. X570 is arguably a little bit overkill for the processor. However, initially I intended to get a Ryzen 7 5800X, which I then afterwards decided to get a Ryzen 9 5900 or 5950X, depending on shortages. But unfortunately, I couldn't find any of those available at the time of purchase. So this is definitely future proof, and I will definitely be upgrading, and there will be a video of that to come. Now, to go into the memory, we have 16 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance Pro, RGB of course, because RGB. This is going to be running at 3200 megahertz. Now, memory speed does matter when it comes to Ryzen chips. So the higher speed, the better off we're going to be. We have that paired with a Western Digital Black SN850. Now this, at the time of purchase, I believe is the fastest M.2 NVMe drive on the market. Gen 4 of course, which our motherboard supports, so everything should be running perfectly smoothly there. We should be seeing speeds of 7 gigabytes per second, but we'll wait and see for the benchmarks. We have a Corsair 750 watt 80 gold plus standard power supply unit. Now, honestly, I wouldn't recommend getting anything below an 80 plus gold. So you have diamond and platinum as well, if I'm not mistaken, following gold. Silver, bronze, you can find them for cheap. However, it may not be something that I would necessarily recommend. However, this is not necessarily a guide, this is just me building my PC. So ultimately, it's up to you. That is just my 2 cents. Now, I should have said, alongside the NVMe drive, I'm going to have a 1TB HDD drive, which I had on my previous computer. And that will just be for excess stuff. So videos that I've finished editing and posting, games if I'm in need of extra storage. Regardless, I do hope to upgrade to another 1TB NVMe drive. This motherboard has 2 M.2 slots, and I hope to be making use of the other one fairly soon. However, I must make it known that the secondary M.2 drive does not support Gen 4, whereas the primary one does. So bear that in mind. If you're going for a similar motherboard or this motherboard itself, bear in mind that you will only need one Gen 4 M.2 drive. Graphics card. Now, an RX 580 8GB model from Sapphire. Of course, as everyone else wants, I wanted a 3080, an RTX 3080. However, in the current economy, once again, that is somewhat impossible. So I settled for a second-hand RX 580. Now, at the time of purchase, I got this for 150 Great British pounds. You can transfer the or translate that into dollars or euros or whatever currency you use, and that is very good because currently these are going for upwards of £300 at the moment. However, I must make it known, if you are going for a secondary RX 580, these are very good cards even now for the price point. I must make it known that these cards were very popular with miners, and in my case specifically, this was completely faulty. I purchased it, and the second I would run anything tasking, even something as easy as, you know, a YouTube video at 4K, the fans would instantly go into overdrive and I would black screen and I'd have to hard restart the PC. Upon opening the graphics card, I noticed that the thermal paste had completely dried out, and so temperatures were reaching the limit pretty quickly, and so after a new application of thermal paste, the issue was solved. However, I don't feel that it's performing as well as it potentially could. I would like to maybe put that down towards, you know, being overused, if that's a thing, but I think there was a recent test done by Linus Tech Tips, great channel by the way if you haven't checked it out already, and they found out that mining doesn't really kill the card's performance. So your mileage may vary, but just beware, try and find out where the card is coming from before you purchase it, so you don't need to do anything more than you need to, such as replacing thermal paste or replacing any sort of component. Finally, that is all going to be sitting in a Colink Observatory Light Mesh RGB tower case. It's an ATX case, plenty of cooling. Mesh front, you have three 120mm fans at the front and one 120mm fan at the rear, and the mesh front just allows brilliant airflow. Of course, you can add an AIO. I will be using the stock cooler that comes with the Ryzen 5 series. However, I don't feel like there's necessarily a need to, but nonetheless, great cooling. Now, let's move on. So first things first, we're going to start by installing the processor. Now, I will say I have tested everything. I have put it all together before taking it apart for video purposes, and so I have removed certain things. Now, first of all, if you were to purchase this particular motherboard, you'll notice that you have what I don't know the technical name for them. I will call them placeholders for now, in these slots. Now, all you need to do before we begin is remove them. They come with 2 screws on each side. Remove the 2 screws and put them aside for now. Also to note, you will have a plastic cover on over the fan and over the heatsink, should I say, for the VRMs. So just take care, make sure to remove all the plastic covers as they can get in the way of thermals. I have removed the M.2 cover and cooling the heatsink for the M.2 drive, just so I don't have to do it later on. So first things first, installing the chip. Now, of course, we have the Ryzen 5 3600X, and as you may notice, there is let's just focus it there, right there, there is a little triangle. Now, what you want to do when installing your processor is find where the triangle is on the slot. In this particular motherboard, it's on this corner. So what you want to do is align the triangle on the processor with the triangle on the slot. Let's lift up the locking mechanism, and you want to gently put it in. Don't force it, especially with AMD chips. You don't want to cause any sort of damage to the the pins. So with Intel, I think they come with pins on the motherboard slots. However, with AMD, they are on the processor itself, as you can see. So we really don't want to damage anything there. So place it as carefully as you can, and it will almost automatically just fall into place when everything is lined up. So what you want to do from there is put down the lock. Now you will feel some resistance. It's not necessarily smooth, for example, as it is up here, but don't be worried. Just slot that in regardless. And that is so. Now, thermal paste. Of course, there are plenty of different types of applications for thermal paste. The most popular, of course, is the pea-sized amount on the middle. I've seen people do an X sort of pattern. I've seen people even go around and then do an X. Honestly, there is not too much of a difference between the different ways of applying thermal paste. However, please avoid overdoing it. When you put thermal paste on the processor, when you apply it, the cooler will spread the thermal paste. So anywhere that you specifically didn't put thermal paste, the cooler, as it makes contact with the face of the processor, will spread it and cover everything for you. If you overdo it yourself with the application of the thermal paste, what's going to happen is that you will not only be detrimental to the temperatures of the processor because it will end up overheating, but you will also end up getting goop all around your processor, which you really don't want to do. So I'm just going to apply a pea-sized amount in the dead center of the processor. There we go, just add a little bit. And that, honestly, will be enough. And now when we put the cooler on, that will spread the paste quite evenly around the face of the processor. Now for our cooler, of course, we're going to be using the AMD stock cooler that comes with the processor. And there's two ways now you can put this on, either this way or you can put it down this way. Now, I don't feel that either one actually really helps with cable management. One thing that I tend to be wary of is cable management, and it's quite odd because, on the one hand, if you place it this way, you have the cable, you could run the cable behind, however, it doesn't actually reach the whole way, it stops just short of the cable input. And if you run it the other way, such as this way, you're kind of in the same predicament, because if you're to run it behind the heatsink, which as a matter of fact, I think that's what we're going to do because it actually works. However, it's not perfect because what you would, really want is the cable to be quite tight around the heatsink, the VRM heatsink. However, I think this will do. So let's apply that. And now the best way when applying, or should I say when you're screwing down a cooler, what you want to do is do it diagonally. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. And you also don't need to screw them on too tight until everything's in place, and then you can apply a certain pressure. And also you don't need to screw in these screws all the way until the end. That could be detrimental to the threading of these screws. So right now I've got the screws in just enough that they are very secure, but I'm not forcing them to go any further than they already can. So next up, let's move on to the RAM. Now, if you are following for your own education, I guess, which once again, this is not an educational guide, I must specify, this is just my personal build. If you do want me to release an educational guide on a PC, then I can do so. However, this is just me sharing my personal build with you. Now, every motherboard has so when you have 2 sticks of RAM, what you want to do is ensure that they are in dual channel. Now, what that means is you're going to be placing them with one slot in between. So we don't want to be placing these RAM sticks together. However, there is an optimal way we can do it to allow the RAM to communicate with the motherboard in a way that will allow it to transfer speeds faster and to operate, well, at its full capacity basically. And with this particular motherboard, those two slots are this one and this one on the end. So ensure to check your motherboard guide on which two slots are optimal for your memory. And of course, you want to insert your memory until the lock automatically engages and you hear that very satisfying click. Next will be our very special M.2 NVMe drive. Now we're going to use this slot to enter it. This is our, once again, refer to your motherboard for this particular, these particular details. However, let's just get the focus on right. So I was going to say this one. However, usually it will be the slot that is closer to the processor. As a matter of fact, let me angle this a little bit better so you can actually see what's going on. So in this current motherboard, this is the closest M.2 slot as opposed to this one to the CPU. And so this will be our Gen 4 CPU. Once again, your motherboard guide will tell you this in detail. So with this one, what we're going to do is slot it in at a bit of an angle. Again, I will turn this just for your viewing pleasure. Yeah, let's just get it there. Fantastic. And you want to slot it in at an angle. Make sure that this notch aligns with the notch on the slot. And once it's in, you just want to place it down and give it a little push. And you hear a click. What you want to do naturally is use an M.2 screw, which usually comes with the motherboard and sometimes the case as well. And you want to slot the screw into this and lock the M.2 into place. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the heatsink instead to lock the drive into place. Unfortunately, I cannot find an M.2 slot with the motherboard or the case. I'm not too sure why, but that is the case regardless. And so I'm going to use the heatsink to hold the drive in place. So we have our heatsink back. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I have already done and tested the whole PC as a whole, and so I removed any necessary tapes or covers to ensure that everything is in full working order, which includes at the base of the heatsink there is usually a blue thin cover to protect the the foam. This is what will make contact with the drive, and that is key to ensuring that our thermals stay low. So ensure that you remove the cover before installing the heatsink once again. These screws are very small, so when removing or installing the heatsink cover, ensure that you keep them as safe as you possibly can. Now to install our motherboard into the case. Now, just before we get into that, I want to briefly talk about the cables now. Because of the nature of the way the fans connect, the case itself comes with a controller, a fan and RGB. Well, I wouldn't say RGB controller necessarily. However, it's basically, yes, a fan controller. And as a matter of fact, I take what I said back. You can connect this to an RGB header on the motherboard and, in theory, align the colors of the motherboard, because it's an RGB motherboard, with the colors of the fans. But we'll get onto the controller in just a second. So first things first, what I will do personally is separate the case cables. So that is the audios, USBs, our beautiful, brilliant power and LED lights, headers, our USB 3, and those I will send to the front, and our fan headers, which will go into the controller, I'm going to route around the back. Now with this case, I have found that the rear fan actually gets in the way of the motherboard installation. So what I'm going to do now is remove the fan and install the motherboard. Now with this particular motherboard, we don't need to worry about installing an IO shield, as it comes with a pre-installed IO shield, which was actually quite a big selling point for me because I believe it affects the aesthetics of the PC quite a bit, and I just love the black and red color scheme. Now we're going to screw the motherboard in, and we are going to connect what needs to be connected, and we should be on the main component, I guess, of the build, which is the graphics card installation. Now, word of warning as I'm doing this, you don't want to over tighten the screws on the motherboard, as that can actually damage the motherboard itself. Now what we're going to do is connect everything that needs to be connected prior to the power supply. We'll get onto that in just a second. I'm going to run the cable behind let me just bring the camera closer. So I'm going to run the cable behind the heatsink well, I would do it on here, but it's going to be very shaky. So just trust that I am doing as I'm saying. Now it will be a tight fit. Now that's done, we are going to connect our notorious mini headers. Next will be our USB 3.0, which are going to route around the back of the case for the sake of cable management once again. And we have our HD audio and USB 2.0 headers. Now we're finally going to install our RX 580 graphics card. Initially what you want to do is remove the PCI e-locks that you will have, and you will have to remove the covers as well. What you also want to do is make sure that this locking mechanism is open and gently slot in the cards. Once it's in, you want to give it a little push and it will lock in place. And now we'll be locking further the card in place with screws. Next, we'll be reinstalling our rear fan. Now, I'm going to stand up the PC case. As this is a fully modular power supply, we will need to attach everything that we need. Now, that's quite a few, so let's go through them one by one. Starting with, of course, let's put that screwdriver to one side. Our 24-pin cable, so we'll put that aside. We are also going to need our CPU cables. Of course, PCIe for the GPU. And we're also going to need SATA power. So we're going to start by attaching them onto the power supply and then installing the power supply into the case. Now we're going to be installing the power supply with the fan facing the bottom of the case. As you can see, we have an open area for airflow, which has a mesh that can be removed to clean, because you will get, especially if you have this on something like a carpet, which you don't really want unless you have good feet on the case. Dust will be something that you'll be dealing with very, very often. Now, as you saw, we installed this with the fan facing downwards, and that is okay because this case will not be going on a carpet floor. However, if it's something that you will be doing, then please ensure that you don't suffocate the fan. So we're finally finished. As you can see, a whole other day. But finally here. Cable management went a little bit funny as I was installing the 24 pin connector. The cables went all sorts of upside down, left and right. So that's not perfect, but listen, we got it done. That's the main thing. And because it's been a little while since we started, I managed to get my hands on another M.2 drive, but I'll leave that one for another video coming very, very, very soon. But other than that, nothing else has been added or taken away. So let's power it on and see how it looks.